Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, we're going to look at the ultimate showdown between what I believe may be happening in 2024, and that is between X11 and Wayland. So let's get started. So if one of the questions that looms over our heads right now is it going to be X11 or Wayland? So which one reigns supreme? So Linux is kind of a vast expanse of software, protocols, I didn't mean that, systems. So each with its unique charm and purpose. These are actually protocols. They're not display managers or display servers. They're actually just protocols. And that is the debate between X11 and Wayland. As many of you probably know, that's somewhat contentious. It's a classic face-off that's kind of reminiscent of the Coke versus Pepsi, AMD versus Intel, NVIDIA versus AMD. So we have two sides here, essentially. One is the X11 camp. And it's tried, it's tested, it's a veteran, it's been the backbone of Linux for over 3 decades now, almost 4. And on the other hand, we have Wayland, that's, I'm going to say, relative newcomer. It came about 15 years ago, so it's been around a while. But it promises a streamlined, efficient approach to display management. The reason for why I think this is going to come to a head in 2024 is that a number of Linux distributions are removing, now I'm, again, in quotes, removing support for X11. And that stirred the pot even more. The reason why I say removing support in quotes is because, to me, if you remove support for something, you rip the X11 libraries out and you rip out all the code that called it and you're done with it. You never use it again. But that's not exactly what's happening. Sometimes people like to, build up these contentious headlines that, GNOME is going to drop X11 or Fedora is dropping X11. But, so let's delve in a little bit. What we're going to concentrate on are 3 of the most popular desktop environments, and that is GNOME, KDE, and XFCE, and talk about those. We're also going to talk about the different distros and what they're doing. And I think the other thing we'll probably talk about is some of the past and the history that's gone on before with X11 that's really clouding things and making this a lot more difficult than it needed to be. The question that we're asking here is, which one should we choose? Because that's really what it all boils down to. So I'm not going to make that decision for you. As you know, I don't do that, but I will try to give you the information that you need in order to help you make an informed decision. So let's wind the clock back. So the X project goes way, 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 way back to 40 years ago. It was a project that was started at MIT called Project Athena. Now, a lot of people ask, what happened to X1 through X9? Maybe you don't care, but they never saw the light of day. They never escaped the lab. They were experiments to try to build up different ideas and experiment around with, because this was all new. Display servers was something that was brand new, and it took them 9 tries to get it right. X10 was a thing. It was a released product. We don't talk about it much. And the reason for that is it's so far back. But so is X11. X11 was released in 1987. So Yeah, that's been a while ago, huh? Yeah. X11 later, became a staple of the Linux display server because it was there and it worked. Time and time again, it's proven itself as a workhorse. It just works. Some of the standout features of X11 is network transparency. Well, what the heck is that? It means that you can run an application on one system and have the display show up on another. Without that feature, distributed systems would have been a lot harder to manage. So the other feather in X11's cap is broad support. There's a lot of application support. There's a lot of people that understand it. There are people that can help you. Now, in the early days, there is an API for X. And so, yeah, you could run stuff directly against it. And then there were window managers that grew up around it in order to control how things were displayed on your screen, allowed you to move things around. But it's not all roses, right? It's not all perfect. X11 has some shortcomings. One of the main criticisms that's leveled against X11 is its dated architecture. It comes from a time when the only way to put graphical displays on, now at this time it would have been Unix, but the only way to do that was something called an X11 workstation or an X workstation. And there were emulators for Windows and Mac and so forth that allowed them also to do that. But you generally had to have a device that communicated with the X11 protocol. And without that, it just didn't work. There's a lot of baggage from that past. There's all kinds of devices in there. That's just a few of them. But it's a bygone era, and that code is still in the X11 baseline. Security is another issue that X has been found wanting. The design of X11 doesn't isolate client applications from each other. So you can potentially have security vulnerabilities that crop up because of that. In fact, in the bygone days, as a practical joke, we used to take over people's terminals. Because of that, you could watch what they were doing. You could take over their terminal. You could display stuff that they weren't expecting. We even had applications that would replace their shell. And when they went to enter something in and start up a job, it would quietly fail and not show them anything. So nothing would start. And so they would be like, what is going on here? So yeah, there was a lot of practical jokes that we did, but unfortunately those practical jokes can turn into security issues. To sum up, X11 is a mixed bag. On one hand, it's been the cornerstone of Linux. And on the other hand, it's got all these issues with the architecture and security concerns. It's clear to me that there is winds of change that are blowing. And Wayland, is that really the one that's going to topple the old guard? Let's turn to Wayland. Wayland is the modern alternative to X11, and it's making way. It offers a fresh perspective on the graphical server protocols. Wayland offers a slew of advantages that makes it a very good contender. One of the most significant pros is that Wayland brings to the table is a simplified, modern design. It eliminates the need for independent display servers, which X11 requires. Wayland streamlines the communication between applications and the graphics hardware. So it's really meant to work in the kinds of environments that we find ourselves in today. This not only reduces the overhead on the system, but it also allows more direct and efficient rendering processes, which speed things up, reduce latency, Anytime you can reduce the path from one point to another, your performance will come up. So Wayland's performance does stand out. I mean, if you do a comparison between an application run in X and the same at like a browser even run in Wayland, you'll find that the Wayland is faster. And that's because of the reduced latency between you and the screen update. So the other thing is that if you get into applications that are more complex, like 3D modeling, if you're doing CAD or CAM, or you're doing, commercial art where you have large drawings that you're working on, or you're doing video, even audio will be noticeable with it, at least from the standpoint of the display. So unlike X11, which largely disregards application isolation, Wayland enforces it and in fact requires isolation between those applications. That means that you can't do what we used to do, which is to do malicious applications that spy on or interfere with other applications that are running on your system. It makes it more difficult, let's say it that way. But even Wayland is not without its thorns too. Every software package has drawbacks. Wayland's biggest drawback is the lack of network transparency. But if you talk to the Wayland people, they will tell you, but that's exactly the point. They don't want that. That is a security issue. So the feature that used to allow applications to run on different systems and be displayed on another, which is the cornerstone of X, that doesn't work on Wayland. So that might be a deal breaker for you. Furthermore, Wayland's compatibility with older Linux software leaves something to be desired. But isn't that always true? I mean, if you're trying to maintain compatibility by having something that translates or handles the protocols coming from older applications, you're always going to run into things that aren't going to work perfectly. I remember one time I was trying to develop a terminal emulator for a Data General workstation, and I had gotten that to work, and it was fine. It was a hardware emulator, and then we wanted to add a DEC VT100 into it. Well, DEC VT100s has some real strange behavior. It's like when you hit the return key and you're at the end of the line, there's certain things that occur that I missed in the protocol. So when we went to actually test it, we found that it didn't work right when we got to the end of the line. It worked fine if the backspace was in the middle of the line, but it didn't work so well at the end. It's stuff like that will drive you crazy, but that's the nature of trying to support this older software, or in this case, older terminals, to try to make them work in an environment in which they were never intended to work at all. I guess the question is, does Wayland bring enough to the table to dethrone X11? One of the more recent news stories is that's stirring the pot, and has been stirring the pot for a couple of months now, is that some distros are removing support for X11. Red Hat announced that RHEL was removing, now they said deprecating, that's their exact word, they're deprecating support for X11 and RHEL 10. That's probably somewhere around the 2025 time frame by the time they get there. So that's a ways off yet, and I'm not sure that that's all that big a deal. Most RHEL instances are in the server side of things, but you will find, even in data centers, RHEL running a graphical user interface, either for the server or for a workstation that's being used by the admins. So yeah, it's possible you're going to run into it. Fedora has also announced that they will be removing X entirely in Fedora 40. Now, I'm not sure that it's as radical as that sounds, because they're really talking about the X11 session. And if you actually go read what they're talking about, it isn't X11 they're removing, it's the X11 session, because they still have to have support for the X11 apps, right, that are still out there. Also, they'll be offering KDE Plasma as Wayland only to just phase out X11, and why would they do that? Well, the issue, as you might guess, is maintenance. Trying to maintain the support for two different display protocols, it can be challenging, and it can be resource intensive. The second reason is X11 is showing its age. Despite its versatility, it carries a legacy of design. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. A legacy doesn't even begin to describe it. The design of decisions that were becoming increasingly irrelevant in today's computing landscape. Wayland, on the other hand, is built from the ground up, and it's contemporary. It has the needs of the current systems in mind. So it fits better with the way Linux is being used today, as you know, a PC, and it has a display connected to it. So lastly, there's the matter of security, and security is really important today, as most of us know, that it's all too easy to break into a system. Wayland's design addresses a lot of these concerns, and it does offer a more secure environment than X does. Although, to tell you the truth, that's not saying a whole lot. Certain applications in environments like GNOME and KDE and XFCE might still prefer X11 for various reasons. There's one of the things I did was I went out to my search engine and I typed in, how many X11 applications are there? And the answer came back, we don't know. We have no idea. And there's a reason for that. You're probably used to going to your package manager and looking for whatever it is you need to install and install it. But a lot of these applications that were written using X11 were predated package management. You might find tar files that you have to download, or even, God forbid, CPIO files that contain the source code, and you would need to download it and recompile it for your system. So, and there's a ton of those. I mean, they're not even in your package manager. The first question is the person still around that wrote that originally? And the second question is, are they willing to go in and change over the protocol spec from X11 to Wayland? I doubt it, but yeah. I mean, a lot of the X11 apps were built by single developers, so they were trying to solve a problem or doing something that was fun. So let's turn our attention to the desktop environments. Let's talk about GNOME, KDE, and XFCE. So first up is GNOME. So GNOME has been a real staunch supporter of Wayland for quite a long time, in fact. The developers of GNOME have invested a lot of time and resources into integrating with Wayland, deeply into the GNOME environment. So GNOME and the GNOME development team have a clear vision of a Wayland future. If you are a GNOME user, you may have already been using Wayland without even realizing it. And that's because of the seamless transition that the GNOME team has achieved with Wayland inside of GNOME. However, that isn't to say that GNOME doesn't support X11. It does. And it's clear to see where GNOME's preferences lie at this point. It's with Wayland. Then we have KDE. KDE has a relationship with X11 and Wayland as well. But it gets more complicated here with KDE because KDE, although it does support Wayland, it's not as deeply integrated as GNOME is. And KDE, as I said, has traditionally been an X11 environment. So to a large extent, the recent versions of KDE have seen improved Wayland support. It's clear that KDE, and it is clear from that KDE is starting to gear up to support a future where Wayland is the norm, but they have a huge legacy of X11 dependency. So yeah, it's going to be slow. Now KDE as a team have not come out and said we are going to do away with X11. To my knowledge, they've never said that, but they are building support in for those people that want to use Wayland. Then we come to XFCE, another completely different story. XFCE is a lightweight desktop environment that prides itself on the simplicity, low resource usage, speed, and all of those things. Those are all priorities. So it's no surprise that XFCE has kind of dragged their feet a little bit on adopting Wayland. Now, the latest releases have an experimental Wayland driver, if you will, inside of them. But it isn't complete. It's not ready for prime time. It's just, this is there if you want to play around with stuff. It may crash. It's there for you to kick the tires on and to comment on. XFCE has some very unique problems because of their deep integration with X11. They have applications which they're having to solve. How do they get these to work on Wayland without having to rewrite them? XFCE is a small team. They're not huge. They don't have a lot of resources and people they can draw from to just throw away all the development that they've done up to this point and say, okay, today we're moving over to Wayland. But it's good to see that they're actually trying to do something with it. And that's good. And that's good. But I suspect that KDE and XFCE will be supporting X11 for quite some time into the future. The choice of what display server you choose can have a pretty large impact on your Linux experience. So, and that depends on the type of applications you're running. Most of us run into problems with Wayland, not because Wayland doesn't work so much, but where it breaks is in the translation, the X11 Wayland driver that's in there to try to help keep running X11 in the environment of Wayland. Ultimately, the right answer here is to not run X11 applications, but that's like saying, well, if you're going to move to Linux, you can't run Adobe Photoshop anymore. People are going to go, well, then I'm not moving. So, yeah, that's generally what they'll do. If you don't have the app that I'm running all the time, well, why should I bother with you? So there's more to this than just a technical issue. As to which display manager is going to be which display manager you're going to continue to use. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you prioritize stability and compatibility? Are you running a lot of X11 applications? Or are you more interested in something that's cutting edge and are willing to adopt new applications to replace the ones that you had been using that were X11 based? So to answer that question, that's likely going to influence your choice of which of those display servers to use. The next part is window managers. We haven't really talked about those. Window managers grew up with X11. So guess what? Most of them are based around X11 protocols. Not very surprising. I always have said this. I'm not saying that window managers are old and outdated. I'm not saying that, but window managers were first. They showed up before the desktop environments did, and they were kind of a pace. Build it yourself. Build your own desktop environment yourself. From pieces and applications that you can assemble to make it look like however you want. So what about their support for Wayland? Well, obviously, most of them aren't going to move. I mean, you may have all kinds of problems with window managers because some of them take shortcuts. They get underneath the covers and they use APIs within the X11 spec that may not be well known. However, there are two window managers that do support Wayland. The first one is Sway, which is it's basically i3 that has been moved over to support Wayland instead of X11. Hyperland is another one. So I guess if you're using i3 and you want something that kind of works like i3, then Sway might be something for you to take a look at. Hyperland, on the other hand, is a brand new window manager that is designed specifically for Wayland. Wayland is gaining traction. Now, when I say gaining traction in the window managers, I don't mean it's taking over window managers. I just mean that there's because of those two, there's people going, ooh, there's a window manager that actually runs on Wayland. It's more of that. It's more of just the awareness is building in the window managers camp that, hey, people are now aware that there are places to go if they want to run Wayland. And that leads us to Wine. For those that you who don't know, and maybe you're new to Linux, Wine is a application It is a translator. It's not an emulator. In fact, that's what it says. Wine is not an emulator. So that's what the acronym stands for. But it is designed to allow us to run Windows applications natively on Linux. So it will translate the API calls from the Windows app into Linux calls and allow you to run those applications. And they have a whole list of them that they have tested. Not all of them will work because of what I just said earlier, that some of the people, in order to gain speed, have delved underneath the covers and are using unpublished APIs to gain that speed. So, and those, of course, Wine wouldn't know anything about, and so they won't work. But Wine has been a game changer for many of us that need to use Windows applications on Linux. However, Wine is also traditionally built around X11. It's heavily integrated into X11. So the shift to Wayland presents both a challenge and an opportunity for the community that's trying to support Wine. And in fact, in mid-January of this year, Wine released version 9, it contains experimental Wayland driver. Now, first of all, let me back up for a second and tell you this. Wine is concerned about application stability, reliability. So for them to add a Wayland driver is pretty amazing to me because those people take that work very seriously about, hey, we don't want our apps to crash. We don't want any of that. So to put a Wayland driver into their latest version means that if you turn it on, then you're going to sacrifice potentially reliability and compatibility with the applications that run. But the driver is disabled by default, and it is experimental, and they tell you that. But if you want to turn it on and you want to play around with it, now it isn't complete, doesn't have everything they need to be able to just say, okay, today we're going to support Wayland. They don't have that, but they have been working on the big important things first, like multi-screen display, for example. It's good to see that they're taking an interest and they realize that looks like, it's a possibility that users may start moving to Wayland and they're going to have to go with it. So another related question is, what about Linux games? What about Steam OS and all of the Lutras and all of those things that come along with Wine and the OS that it's built around? So first of all, Steam OS is based on Debian. At least the last time I checked it was. And as you will, when we get into talk about distros, you'll see that Debian is heavily tied to X11 or Xorg. So, and Debian does support Wayland today on Debian 12. They have duality support between X11 and Wayland. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the applications that Debian has written are X11. Those haven't been moved yet. So yeah, they're not deeply integrated into Wayland yet. They're, again, open source projects. They're moving slowly over to it as they have time and they see a need. Remember, Debian's focus is on reliability and stability. That's their thing. That's what they're good at. And that's why people use them. So they're not about to just go ripping up a whole bunch of stuff and test it real quick, throw it out in the community and go, I hope this works. So as the debate between X11 and Wayland continues, what about this thing about the distros? What are they doing? What are all the major distros doing? So I'm going to talk about a few. I mean, there's 450 of them, and I'm certainly not going to go line by line down through all of them to try to explain what every one of them is doing. But let's talk about the big ones. First, Fedora. And they were an early adopter of Wayland. I mean, they're a major contributor to GNOME, as well as so is Canonical. Fedora has been using Wayland as a default display server since Fedora 38. Now, you may remember that Fedora, like Canonical, had switched over a couple of times and back. because they ran into problems with Wayland and they switched back to X11 again. But as of Fedora 38, they're over. They're defaulted to Wayland. So this move has proven to be a pretty significant endorsement for Wayland. And I think it kind of shows the way for other distributions, if they want to make that switch, how to do it. Next, well, we have Ubuntu. Ubuntu switched to Wayland. They were one of the earliest ones to switch over to it in Ubuntu 17.10. And you probably remember, if you go back that far, how bad that was. It was horrible. And they quickly reverted back to X11 in the next release in 1804. So yeah, it was only about 6 months later they went, okay, all right, we're going to switch back to X11. They waited until Wayland matured a little more, and then 2204 started seeing Wayland take the helm once again. RHEL, as you know, announced in November that they're deprecating, and that's the word, X11 and RHEL 10. So I think this may underscore, it definitely underscores their commitment to Wayland. And I don't know how much influence that'll have on other distributions to follow suit, but the fact that they're confident enough to do it, that's amazing. But remember, RHEL is the desktop environment is not the main thing that they do in the enterprise environment. So on the other hand, and then we have Pop OS. So they're coming out with a new release sometime this spring that will follow Ubuntu's 2404 long-term support release. So typically those show up May, June timeframe. I don't know when it'll be. They haven't announced yet when the new Pop OS will come out. But sometime after that, they're planning on releasing the alpha version of Cosmic. Alpha means that, hey, this is an early look. It's not feature complete. It could have significant bugs in it. It hasn't been fully tested. So, hey, have fun with it and play around with it and let us know what you think. But in Cosmic, there is support for Wayland and X11, as I understand it. So again, that's offering you another distribution with additional freedom of choice there between supporting running on X11 or running under Wayland. Linux Mint. So in the past, Linux Mint has been, again, they're another one that's concerned about stability, maturity, reliability. That's their core focus. And so it's understandable that they'd be really cautious about switching over to Wayland because it's new, it's untried, it's unproven. They don't know what's going to happen, and they have a desktop environment that no one else has that they developed, Cinnamon, and so which is heavily integrated, of course, with X11. So just recently, I think it's 21.3 that they just released this month, they have an experimental Wayland driver in there as well so that you can kind of kick the tires and play around with it. I think you have to, I don't know all the details about how to turn it on and start using it. But again, it's not feature complete. So yeah, you just don't put it on your production system. Yeah. Whenever they say it's not feature complete, that's a red flag. Don't put this on something you use as a daily driver. Put it on put it in a VM and go play with it once in a while. Debian, we've talked about them. They offer both X11 and Wayland support, but remember, internally, they are heavily integrated into Xorg. Yeah, I don't know what their plans are. Debian is very tight-lipped about things that they're doing until they have decided what to do. Their discussions kind of remain inside of their development team. They've always kind of been that way. Now they will pop out if they need help with something, if they need somebody to come over and, hey, you guys know Wayland, why don't you come over here and help us out with this? Let's talk about X11 for a minute. Why do we have Wayland? Why does it exist? People always never ask that question. I mean, I've seen some people on the Linux side, they've asked a bunch of questions like that with distro. Why does this distro exist? Well, it exists because somebody had a need for it. That's why. But Wayland, why does it exist? There was X10, and then X10 became X11. It was an upgrade, a feature upgrade. And then there was a plan for X12. But X12 never flew, never got off the ground. Why? What happened? Well, for that, you need to go all the way back to when X11 was being architected and built. X10, when it went over to X11, there was a mandate from the X Foundation wasn't around at that time, but the controlling entity, which would have been MIT, absolutely insisted, and it was on backwards compatibility, which is a good thing. I mean, you want to be able to run your old apps, but they actually insisted, and it went to the level of absurdity that even features which everyone knew in X10 were deprecated, they mandated that those things be supported in X11, even though everybody knew it. Nobody was using them. And so, yeah, it was just so absurd that all that extra code came over and everybody knew it would never be used. And so X11 bloated into this huge monolith of an application base. Go look at also the notes from the developers that were involved in X12, where one of them was actually trying to see how much effort it would be to try to streamline the work that was in X11 first before moving it toward X12, towards supporting the new features that X12 was going to bring. So this person went in and actually removed 100,000 lines of code that was deprecated and had been deprecated. And so they got looking at the rest of it and they were like, oh my God, this is everywhere. And the comment in the guy's post was, I don't remember his name, but his comment was, and this doesn't even put a dent in the amount of code that's deprecated in X11. Well, the X12 team quickly realized they didn't have the resources to be able to deal with this. And they didn't want to bring all that bloat into X12. And so they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the money, and they didn't have the willingness to do it. So they tabled it. It died before it even got started, which is probably good. But on the one hand, it's probably good that happened, but it was kind of bad that X11 was in such horrible shape because of the decisions that were made between X10 and X11. X12, had it gone forward, I mean, of course, it would have led to a whole series of releases after that. But because it didn't go forward, the team that was starting to do work on X12 went back to work on X11, and I think a lot of them kind of grew frustrated, and at some point during the 2000s, they went over and started a new development for Wayland. That's where it started. That's where it came from. They were fed up with all the politics of the X11 group. Now, I've talked about this before, how IBM dealt with this sort of a problem. And what they do is after a certain number of years, they take that application and they just throw it in the trash. They get a new set of requirements and they rewrite it. Now they have the money to do that, or at least they did. I don't know about now if they still do it, but they did when I was there. So they solved the problem by just throwing that garbage away and starting over. Well, that's essentially what Wayland is doing. That's exactly what they're doing. They're throwing what was in X11, they're taking the requirements that they know they need, they're putting them in Wayland, and that's what's being built. So lastly, perhaps, and the most important, is the emergence, what Wayland is promising to be, and that's a more efficient alternative to X11. The question is, it is gaining traction in the Linux community, but will it gain enough to make it a compelling replacement for X11? In other words, is it good enough that you would be willing to switch over to Wayland full-time and never touch X11 again? And you can see that this is not a black and white issue. There's technical issues here, sure. There's security issues here, sure. But there's also the issue of, what do you do? What are you using? I think the recent news that the distributions are starting to remove support in some way or another. And at the same time, some of the desktop environments are starting to work on Wayland implementations of their desktop environments and the window managers that are coming too, I think that speaks well for, what is actually in the undercurrents of the Linux community. Trying to solve the security issues, trying to make sure that our systems will work from now on into the future. You have to look ahead a little bit too. But the question still remains, is Wayland the right technology to replace X11? X11 will continue to receive security patches and occasional updates for some of the core services and some of the ancillary programs that run around it. But I think this year is a decision point. But whatever happens, one thing is for sure, the Linux world is never dull. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video today. And if you did, please like and subscribe and share it out with your friends. I hope to see you all in the next video, and bye for now.